what happened with your father?
December, we spent Christmas together as a family. And by June, he had a full leukemia diagnosis. He always thought he was going to live. I mean, really up until probably the last week, my dad never really got to a point that he really felt the reality of the situation.
If you had to find something positive about this experience of losing your father, what would that be?
Oh, connecting with people. My experience in grief is that it's much, much, much more complicated. There's happiness in grief, and there's gratitude in grief, and there's sadness in grief, and there's maybe some regret in grief. Maybe there's anger in grief. It's like there's so much.
Grant, I want to thank you for being here and taking the time to talk to me. I want to shout out Blake, prior guest, who made the introduction to us. You know, I watched some of your clips online. Obviously, for anyone that doesn't know you, he posts a lot about your experience with grief and losing your father. I don't know a bulk of the story on purpose, just so I could hear for the first time. As for those of you that are listening to the show or new to the show, that's how it goes mostly. I like to get part of the story just to hear it fresh, so most of my reactions are natural, if you will. But what happened with your father?
Yeah, it started... We've known he's had cancer for a long time, for like 10 years. And he had two types of cancer. He had two types of bone cancer. And for most of the last 10 years, they were dormant, right? Or they were okay. And the multiple myeloma came first. And that was 5 years ago. And he went through chemo. He was treated. And things were pretty good. He had some side effects, but it was pushed into remission. And then about a year ago, he started getting lethargic and tired in January of last year. And he went and got blood tests, and it was clear something was changing. They weren't quite sure, but it was clear something was changing. And he, in April, I guess, of last year, he started chemo again for MDS, the precursor to leukemia. And by June, he had a full leukemia diagnosis. So it just went from January, December, we spent Christmas together as a family, and things were okay. Everyone was normal. And by June, he had a full leukemia diagnosis. So he moved to Seattle. He lived in Alaska. That's where I grew up. He moved to Seattle to do a bone marrow transplant. So he was there from July until November, going through first chemo, and then at the very end, he got the bone marrow transplant, and he died in early November due to complications of that transplant. Do you know much about leukemia?
Surface level things.
Okay. Leukemia impacts your blood, right? Impacts your bone marrow, which impacts your blood. There's three big impacts. One, you lose a lot of energy because hemoglobin is kind of what brings oxygen to your cells, and you don't have much of it, right? So you become transfusion dependent. You need blood all the time. Second is your body doesn't make platelets anymore, which is what helps you stop bleeding. So if you cut yourself, or even worse, fall and hit your head, it's really bad. And the third is you don't have an immune system, because immune system is blood cells, and leukemia messes up that process. So
is it, if I'm understanding, it's not exactly leukemia that kills you, or is it the other external events that may come into your system due to your body not being able to heal itself, or is it both?
I think it's both. For my dad, he died from an infection. So the bone marrow transplant, they kill all your bone marrow. They give you a blood infusion of donor cells, and it takes some time for those cells to settle into your bone marrow, become healthy bone marrow, and start producing healthy blood. And in that time period, he got a infection, a lung infection.
And that's from the surgery or the process? Or
from the environment, I think. It's just, he was in the hospital for weeks. It's just the hospital environment. People are coming in and out. And he had a lot of infections before. They were all treatable. This one impacted his lungs, right? So he had an infection in his lungs and caused bleeding. And he went from, it was like Saturday morning, he was okay, all things considered. And he died Sunday night.
So it was quick. It was quick.
It was very quick. It went from him being relatively okay to him being admitted to the ICU in about 12 hours. and him being admitted to the ICU and him dying was about 24 hours.
And within that day, was there any opportunity to speak to him, or was he out?
He was out. Yeah. When he went to the ICU, they intubated him, and that was it.
So it's talking about November, this past November?
Yeah, November 3rd, he died.
So it's only been 3 months.
Yeah, 3 months.
All right. So this is it's even more fresh than I even expected. So it's always interesting to me to have these early conversations, let alone any conversations down the line, because, I'm sure you'll come to learn on your own, and that's your process, but it evolves. I'm sure it's even evolved in 3 months, but it's just a very early conversation. And even to preface where you are right now, which we'll get to, what were the last few years like? Where was your family and your father's mental state in regards to him surviving this? And did you have conversations with him in regards to the potential that he would die?
He always thought he was going to live. I mean, really up until probably the last week, he thought he was going to live. And it made it harder in some ways, I think. Like we talked, we had conversations about death. And we had to do a healthcare directive and talked about what he wanted done with his stuff, like if he dies. But I would say my dad never really got to a point that he really felt the reality of the situation. And that created an odd dynamic, because I think the rest of my family, my mom, my brother, and I felt like we understood the risks and felt those going into the bone marrow transplant. The doctors told him he had probably less than 5% chance of survival.
And they told him that?
Yeah, they told him that. But he thought that he was going to make it. He thought he was going to be one of the ones that made it. So we would talk about it with him, but I think he never really got to a point that he kind of accepted the fact that there was a good chance he was going to die. Like logically, he knew it, but emotionally, he never got there externally. I mean, I honestly think it's probably like a protection mechanism, right? I think going through the whole process was interesting just to see. I felt seeing my dad and seeing my experience through it. I just felt how we're really animals at the end of the day, right? Like we like to think that we're these evolved 21st century creatures, right? But when it's death that you're facing, things feel different. And there's things we can't control or can't quite, I don't know, talk through or something.
Yeah, I mean, death puts everything in perspective. It puts everything in perspective, especially in regards to what you said, how you can't control it. I mean, you can do things that are preventative. You can do things that are going to try to save your life, of course, but inevitably it just really puts things in perspective about that which we can control, and what you experience, you can only control so much, except the one thing you can't control, I guess, are your thoughts and your perspectives and how you respond to things. But again, it's a gentle conversation in regards to response, because it's just a different thing between response and reaction, and the way you react is still healthy too, especially when you're in the moment and you're as fresh as you are right now. There's no judgment or right way to react, but part of that process is to figure out how you respond, right? Because I think there's two different things. So how do you juggle that, your father's response in regards to not feeling like he was going to survive, and you guys having a perspective of really maybe feeling the gravity of 5%? So what was that juggling? Did you guys kind of keep that behind closed doors between you and your family, discussing it rather than kind of rip his hopes away?
It was something we talked about as a family. I would say that there was a point, because the bone marrow transplant's a procedure, and there was a point where the doctors told him, like, this by Sunday, you kind of need to let us know, like, do you want to do this? Do you not want to do this? And we talked as a family. We had fairly honest conversations, and we all pushed back, I think, some, or voiced our concerns about the trade-offs, because when you get to that point, there's very real trade-offs in how you want to spend the last part of your life, right? Like, is it important to die at home? Is it important to do the things that you like to do one more time, right? Is it important to have meaningful conversations with the people in your life? Or would you rather try everything you can to survive, right? And I think for me, it was important that I feel like my dad understood those trade-offs. And even if he decided that he wanted to try everything to survive, he understood there were trade-offs with that, right? Like if you want to try everything, that's okay. That's your choice, of course. It's your life. Also understand that that means that you may never go home again. And I did have those conversations with him. We talked about that as a family. Once he made the decision to do the transplant, then it felt like, okay, we're just going to support, right? Like you made your decision. There's no going back once it starts. So our responsibility is just to support you in your decision and leave it at that.
And did you all feel like you were agreeing on that? Because I know you said you used the word dynamic earlier, and maybe not in this context, but I've come to learn the different dynamics of how everyone handles grief or let alone any experiences in life. And just for context, how many siblings do you have?
I have an older brother.
So it's two boys and your mom. So what was the dynamic, let alone with the grief, which, this is a two-part question, but first, what was the dynamic of making that decision or leaving that decision to him and coming to terms with whatever path he wanted to do? Was there any kickback or struggle for any one of you to accept that?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think some of us might have made different choices. At least we think we might have. It's obviously impossible to know until you're in that position. But we all thought he was making the right decision for him. He'd been very clear for a long time that he wanted to do this bone marrow transplant. He'd been trying to do it for a long time. He had projects that he was working on that were really important to him. It's very clear that for him, this was the right decision. I think the part I wanted acknowledgement on, just emotionally, I mean, it's really about me, right? The part I want acknowledgement is that he understood the trade-offs, right? And I'm not quite sure if he ever really did, right? Like that, I think in my understanding of the worst case scenario in his mind was maybe the transplant doesn't entirely work and they get to a point where like, you only have 3 months to live. And then he gets to decide whether he wants to go home or like how he wants to spend it. And I'm not sure if he really logically he got it, but I'm not sure if like emotionally understood that's like this decision might mean that I don't get to go home again, which is what happened, right? I mean, he died in the hospital in Seattle.
Yeah, it's interesting. Again, when you talk about these trade-offs, everything you just listed off, it's so correlated to just decisions we can make and trade-offs we think about when we're alive.
Mm-hmm.
That's the ironic part. It's, these when you hit these moments of, when you, specifically your case, obviously it was different than my father because it was, it was more abrupt, even though that was abrupt in a sense at the end. So I'm not comparing the two, but when you have these moments of trying to understand and grapple with the situation, knowing your life might die, then you start having these profound questions more about, okay, where should I spend my time? What are these decisions? But these are also decisions to me that it's so important what you're saying, because these are decisions we could think about every day. Like, where am I going to spend my time? What is important to me is what I'm pulling from that trade-off selection that you're bringing up. And do I want to spend my day surviving every day and just being frantic about this, that, and the other? Do I want to spend my time doing what I love? And these are extrapolating big questions that we can ask ourselves today. And those questions tend to come in the most dire of moments, which is so important that you're sharing this story, because for people listening that haven't experienced what you've experienced, I haven't personally gone through what you've experienced. No one has. That's your guys' experience. It's like, I would never want people to wait for these dire moments to make these realizations. And it's hard to really digest because you truly won't know until it happens, which is what you're going through right now. But those decisions, again, that we make affect other people too. So I feel like that is the hard part to navigate with your father's decision. And it's very mature to accept his decision because that affects you.
Absolutely.
It affects you guys.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's like the majority of my final memories with my dad are like in a hospital hooked up to machines,
That
right?
sucks.
I mean, that's like,
right.
And those are really painful memories, right? I mean, it's doctors around and it's beeping noises and they're really kind of unpleasant memories.
And do you grapple with the idea of, having they're so fresh? It's been 3 months, man. So it's, it's heavy. But at the same time, do you do you grapple with those memories? Maybe it's just because it's fresh, but those are the last memories. We put a lot of weight on the last time we spend with each other. I just had a conversation with a girl who's really focused on the way their conversation ended before they died. And so, and I get that. That sucks because it feels like it's the last moment you had, but then it's often gleamed over the idea that we had all this time before, and like that's really where the juice of it was. So do you find this any kind of battle between these last moments, the last few years or days, if you will, compared to all the memories that you've had prior?
There's some of that, but not as much anymore. I think I spent a lot of time with him in Seattle, and while some of those memories weren't great, there were a lot of peaceful times, and we talked a lot. I recorded moments with him. We got out. It was meaningful, and there were other things I'd done before. We have this family cabin in Alaska, and my dad's a pilot, and he'd always, one of his bucket list items in life was to land his own plane near the cabin. And I prioritized that and did it in the spring of 23. And that was like the only time that we could have done that. I didn't know it at the time, of course, but looking back, it was like that. If I had delayed it, it wouldn't have happened. And I hold on to those things a lot because I think you're right. Like we focus on all these moments at the end or things we wish we had done differently or said differently. But at the same time, like we don't know in the moment, right? Like we don't know in the moment what's going to happen. The one thing I will say is that I missed him dying, and I was in New York. I spent a lot of time with him in Seattle. My brother and my mom came. We had a schedule of like who's going to be there with him. So my quote unquote shift was over. I went to New York where I had friends. I was like, I need to like do something exciting. I need to have fun. And I got there, and like the next day, I got there on the Friday and the Saturday. And maybe I got there Saturday, I think. And then Sunday morning, I woke up that he was in the ICU, and I was trying to decide, like, should I go or not? Right? Again, he had a lot of infections before. Who knows about this one? And I thought, like, okay, well, I want to go to the show with this friend tonight. We had plans, and I'll fly out Monday morning. And Sunday afternoon, my mom called us and was like, Grant, I really think you should go to Seattle. So I did. I went to Seattle and got on the flight at like 4 and was sitting in this seat waiting to push back when the doctors called and said, like, this is it. This is the end. And they said, we'll try to keep him alive until you get here, but we're not sure. And it's like halfway to Seattle when he died. And I think those moments, right, are it in the time after he died, I felt guilt around that, right? Because it's, in hindsight, obviously it's such a minor thing. But I've since kind of made peace with that, I think, and do focus more on the moments earlier, because that is what matters, right?
Yeah, it is what matters, but we have this innate ability to focus on those negative things. They seem so much more profound.
Yeah.
It's like you could have 100 people in a crowd, 98 are cheering for you, and there's two assholes calling you XYZ, and you hear those.
Yeah.
So it does take, I think it takes a little bit of effort to remember and shift on those beautiful memories that you just shared, that it's amazing that you just had. But you do have to dim the noise of moments like that. But at the end of the day, like, let me ask you, like, would your dad be upset at you that you took some time for yourself to go to a show knowing you're just going to be there in a couple of days? Would he be upset at you?
No.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Does that help at all? Not like that's not suggested for me. I'm just saying, like, is that part of the workaround of thinking about like perspectives of what he would think or how you look at things?
Yeah, I think it helps. Yeah, I mean, I think you mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I feel like I try to push through all the stereotypes and performances and expectations of grief, right? Like what we should do, the moments we should be there, how we should show up, how we should show grief, or how we should respect them or honor them, right? Like there's a lot of layers there, and I think that's part of it, right? It's like, oh, I feel like a bad son because I missed this moment, and in reality, it's like, wait, like I like spent months with him helping out when he needed it, right? He didn't need me there. He was intubated. I don't know, my brother was there. Like he didn't necessarily like need me there. And that's something that I try to work through. It's helpful to hear other people's process too with grief, because that like performing grief is like very real, right? I think at least of grief is like the widow in the black veil, like with the rain next to the grave.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And that is like the sole experience of grief. And my experience in grief is that it's much, much, much more complicated than that. Right. There's happiness in grief, and there's gratitude in grief, and there's sadness in grief, and there's maybe some regret in grief. Maybe there's anger in grief. It's like there's so much.
Yeah, I've always compared it to the worst and best charcuterie board of all time. It's got all these eclectic flavors, all these different types of foods on one plate, which to me represents every single possible emotion. And you never know which one you're going to get, but it all kind of works together. And it's convoluted, it's confusing, and it's not as it's portrayed in the movies at all, or how we're paradigmed to even believe the way we should do things. And I think that the key word that you're saying that I'm resonating with is the word should. There's no should in regards to a perfect formula. I think the only should is what feels right to you. Like, I think we know what we should do. And even if you don't, that's okay. Because in the moment, you're probably going to have no idea what to do. But at some point, as time goes, and not that time heals, as I've said a million times, I think it's what we do with our time that really makes the difference. You can move on 10 years and maybe memories fade. But if you're not doing shit with those 10 years to actually contemplate like you are, maybe trying different things, then time's not going to do anything, in my opinion. But I think, there is a letting go of what I should do, but I always wonder where that comes from. Like, where do these ideas come from of how we should be performing through grief? Do you think that's something natural or something that is infiltrated on top of us from what we've seen outside of us?
I think it's societal, like cultural. I think that it comes from wanting to be whatever, a good son, or wanting to honor them, or wanting to show how much you love them, or wanting to, right, like wanting to express that in some ways, right? Wanting to be like, this person was really important to me. And I think that we'd like try to imitate, like the default is to imitate what we see.
And I read a comment recently. It breaks my heart a little bit in regards to, I forget what I posted. I think I was talking a little about this, about just kind of the layers of grief, but in particular, kind of to play off what you were saying, because you did mention some positive things there. You didn't just, your innate reaction to what grief is to you wasn't just pain, sorrow, shit. It was like a gratitude. There is some joy mixed in there. And it's important to live and grieve and do all those things, because I think we do kind of just get stuck in this sorrow, which is real. And we got to be there. We have to be there in order to get out of it. But at the same time, when I see some people online saying, oh my God, my life is over. I lost the love of my life. And, I'll never be the same. Life is this, that, and the other. And it does break my heart to see people be there. And I hope that conversations like these do open the eyes of people to see that there's more life to live. But at the same time, to me, it always seems like I read shock that the person that's in their life was going to be there forever. You know what I mean? To me, the way I see it now, and maybe it's just because my dad died at 12 years old in the way that he died. And it was like a realization of, oh shit, this can happen. Like, this happened to us and 3,000 and thousands of other people, nevertheless. But it wasn't just a news headline where, oh, you see so-and-so died in the news. That's terrible. And you feel sympathetic and empathetic, but it's still not a loss you took. So once these things happen to you, it wakes you up and you can go in either direction. But I think maybe because it happened to me so young, I'm not going to be, I'll be shocked. There's an innate shock. I'd be bullshitting you if I wasn't like, there's not going to be a shock, because it happened to my mom 2023. She had cardiac arrest and I was shocked. She's fine now. She got out of it, but there was an innate shock. But even after, in that moment, ironically on a plane as well, I was like, oh no, this happens. There's no way this is how my mom goes. There's no way this is how my mom dies. There's no way. But then I slowed down and was thinking, no, this very well could be the way my mom dies. And it's not shock to me that I'm just going to be a day where my mom's not going to be with me. It's going to happen to all of us. People that we love may outlive us. We may outlive them. But to me, like, the shock value is so interesting to me, how people are like surprised that someone could die in their life. And it is an adjustment. I'm not trying to be insensitive. That's not hard to navigate. It sucks. Fucking sucks. And it is an adjustment. It's going to feel like a whole new world because it is. You didn't just lose that person. You lost your habits, your routines. You lost the phone calls. You lost all these things, your identity. So I'm not saying it's easy because it's not at all. It's one of the hardest things to go through. But this idea that we're surprised that people die in our life, to me, I can't see it like that because I'm like, maybe it's morbid, but I'm like, oh no, like my sister can die tomorrow. I can die today. And it's not morbid. If anything, it just puts me back in a present place. Like where you said, that's where everything happens. It's like in the moment, we don't know what's going to happen, but all we have is this moment. So let's be here. And the shock value to me just doesn't, to where I'm at many years into my grief, it doesn't add up to me. Does that make sense? Is that insensitive? Does that add up?
No, it makes sense. I mean, my mom is very pragmatic, and her view of death and a lot of things in life is pragmatic. And she would talk to him because one of the things I shared a lot about my dad online through this process, and it was strange because my dad watched it, which was great. He got so much just motivation and comfort from hearing people cheer for him. It was like this incredible experience that I'm so grateful for, and he was so grateful for. At the same time, I tried to share honestly, but because he was so confident, I didn't share everything about what we felt might happen, right? And so we had this weird feeling, my family and I, not my dad, of like people are watching this movie, not really knowing how this is going to end, right? Like we kind of know how this movie is probably going to end, and other people don't. So we talked some about like, how do we actually share that he died? Like, how do you present this, right? And my mom I forget who she found this from. It was just this idea. I think this is similar to what you're talking about, which is that it's not like, why did this happen to us, right? It's like this happens every day, and today it happened to us, right? Like this, Fred Hutch does 500 bone marrow transplants a year, right? That is one procedure in one hospital, and like a quarter of the people that go through that don't make it, right? There are people in that hospital just doing bone marrow transplants who die all the time, who are sisters and brothers and fathers and mothers and everything, right? And yeah, it sucks that my dad was one of them, but it happens all the time, right? And it just happened that on like November 3rd, it was our turn.
That's what it is. It's like this happens all the time. Just today it happened to us. And it's not to swipe it under the rug. It's not to tell people that it can't hurt, because it's going to hurt. It does hurt. It sucks. The day, I've always said that I hope I outlive my entire family, even though I'm like, fuck, I think if I live 70, 80 years, I'm probably good. But I'm like, I hope I outlive my family because I'd rather be the last one, because losing someone sucks. When you die, in my head, granted, we don't know for sure what's going to happen. It's like the ones that are alive to deal with the shit. And I'd rather die on the sword. I'd rather be the last one alone, having grieved everyone in my family. As weird as that sounds, I don't know why that thought always runs through my head. But at the same time, it's not a morbid thought to have these thoughts. It's a self-awareness. I think it helps you cope when the moment comes, but it also makes you live life more full with that idea. And I think the more we push it off and thinking that people are gonna be around us forever and that it can't happen to you, that's bullshit. It's bullshit. And I think we're living in a fantasy land thinking that we're not gonna die. And again, maybe it just, I don't know if you've felt the same way until you lost your dad. Maybe that was a shift for you, but it happens all the time, and it doesn't mean you can't feel it. It doesn't mean you can't go through it. You're going to have to go through it. But to think that that's where your life ends, it's not. And like you said, how many people die every day just in the procedure that your father had to go through? How many other people have gotten through it? There's plenty of people that I've talked to like you. You're going through it right now. You're still very fresh, but I've seen so many inspirational stories of people that have had it way worse than me on paper and in reality, and they're still smiling. And that's the whole point of this. It's like, it's sad, it sucks, but there's still life to live. And I want people to realize that there's still life to live after you lose your loved one.
Absolutely. I think that question that you asked earlier, like, would my dad want that, right? Like, I think that's where it helps. Like, yeah, my dad wouldn't want me wallowing in whatever. Like, he wants to be remembered for sure, right? He wants us to like think about him, I'm sure. But he said that explicitly before he died, is that like, I don't want you to like put your life on pause, right? Like, I don't want you to put everything to the side. Like, yeah, you can be sad and that's okay, but yeah, like you got to keep going, moving forward.
Yeah, that's my message to my people. It's like, when I die, you know what? You can put on the performance, cry a lot, make me feel important, but after that, like, throw a party. Like, it's like, you know, I want everyone to remember. Like, literally, if I die, maybe this would be my living eulogy. Like, my family, my friends, if I die, at least from my mouth, I've been very blessed in many ways to have done a lot of things that I've enjoyed. I've been more blessed than a lot of people, even just at the beginning of my life. And granted, of course, I've gone through some things and my family has gone through some things, but I don't want anyone to stop living their life. I know my mom would be crushed because that losing a child is a whole nother level to things, if you ask me, like I've mentioned many times. But I wouldn't want my sisters to completely stop their life. They have kids, so I know they wouldn't. I know my sisters, they'll continue on. There's going to be pain. But it's like, we've had so many memories. We've lived this life. The love is real. I couldn't express more love than I couldn't possibly express more love within my friends and family than I think I have in my life with the people I love. And it's like, if I were to die today, then just keep smiling, keep living, keep enjoying your life, because I may be gone, quote unquote, but you still have life to live. And that's not what I would want. So just like you were saying with your dad, if like that person that you lost, if you know deep down that's not what they would want, then that can relieve some of the pressure to have to feel sad all the time.
Absolutely.
So I feel like sometimes we express our grief as a showmanship, maybe like a performance, like you said, in regards to, I have to be sad because this person's gone. If I'm not sad, does that mean I'm forgetting them? If I'm not sad,
100%.
does that mean I didn't love them? No. I think love is living your life the best way you can in honor of them.
Absolutely. And I think for me, I gotta like take a break from the sadness sometimes, right? Like I feel like I revisit it, right? It's like too much for me to sit in it. And I feel like I do, like, I like nick it going by
Dude,
in
I
life
cannot
sometimes.
agree more. I love that.
It's like I'll see something that reminds me of him, or I was walking in Glendale the other day, and there were these two biplanes that flew over. I was like, because the pilot thing, right? I was like, I would have taken a picture of that and sent it to my dad if he were alive, right? And I feel that grief, right? And it's like, it hurts so good, right? Like it hurts, it's painful, it makes me feel close to him too and feel that love. And I couldn't be in that place for very long. I just like touch it, it's like, oh, it's still there, and then like keep going. And I think that helps me process it, because it's too much for me to sit in it.
I think that sounds like a perfect balance. And again, only you can answer that if it feels good to you, which it sounds like it is. I'm similar to that too, and maybe even throughout, even today. Like, yeah, I like to nick the sadness. I think the sadness is a good reminder. I think it's a good reminder of what we've gone through. It's a good reminder of what we had, and it's a good reminder to remember what sadness feels like. Because without the sadness, how we wouldn't know the contrast. Like, we need that we need the sadness to feel joy, and vice versa. And I think touching that, to me, and similar mechanisms that I took, where I used to watch the footage over and over again, and occasionally I'll still do it because I feel like, you know what, I feel like I just need to feel. I just want to feel something right now. I want a couple tears to come out, and then after that, okay, wipe the tears and let's go. Like, I can still go on with my day. I can still laugh right after that. And maybe that short form expression of sadness, I think, is healthy, because it doesn't bother. It keeps it, like, releases the air of the balloon a little bit, little by little, as opposed to one time. And then I think there is a little bit of a danger of constantly sitting in the dwelling. But again, maybe you have to go through that too. It could be months, could be years, to realize that. Like, I'm not saying don't sit there, because sometimes you gotta to get out of it. But at some point, it's like, I think just touching the sadness and not dwelling there, and almost like talking about it. People constantly are venting and going over some shit they're going through in their life, whether it's work, love, breakups. Constantly talking about it is just keeping you there. It's just keeping you there, as opposed to trying to consider taking one step forward. So I wonder if there's like a yin and yang to constantly dwelling and talking about the negative shit, as opposed to trying to find the positive and trying to move forward.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, I try to see it holistically, right? Like the whole idea of right? That there's sadness, and there's gratitude, and there's joy, and that kind of all those things coexist. And they can coexist, and they do coexist. And by only acknowledging one side as feels like doing myself a disservice.
It's hard to see the other side, you know? I think for a lot of people, it's really hard to see that the other side still exists.
Yeah, it could be. I don't know. Yeah, I don't really know about kind of how other people feel with it. I think for me, like the beauty is at the intersection of those things. To me, like the humanness is at like the intersection of those. When I feel most like myself and most grounded is when I'm at the intersection of those.
I love that. The intersection is kind of an awareness of both sides.
Yeah.
You see both sides,
and it feels very real to me. I think it's very honest, and I think that's why it hits so deep. Is it's like that. That's what's real. It's not ignoring it. It's not like dwelling in it. It's acknowledging that like that's the full experience.
And now this is a question that, you know, I feel like can ring some people's bells, because I think I literally asked my sister this question once, and she was like, you know, there's nothing positive from the situation. But then she forcibly had to answer the question just to focus on the positive, as weird as that sounds in the worst moments. If you had to find something positive about this experience of losing your father, what would that be?
Oh, connecting with people. There's so many. I could spend a lot of time listing positives of this experience, right? There's a lot of horrible parts to it for sure, right? But connecting with people. I mean, having this conversation, sharing online, being able to I was in Venice for a friend's show and was sitting at a bar, and someone came up and we started chatting, and within like 10 minutes, came up very quickly, like she had talked that her mom had died like 5 or 6 years. And all of a sudden there's like this connection, right? We had this like great conversation about what our experiences were like. And social media makes that even more pronounced, where I will have conversations with people from all different backgrounds. People have walked such different paths than me, and yet we have the same experience of grief.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that has been this really positive experience. I mean, just being able to connect with all sorts of people. I remember that a friend texted me after my dad died, like, "Welcome to the Dead Parents Club." And I'd never heard that term before.
I kind of sell, I don't really push it, but I have Dead Dad Club hats and Dead Mom Club hats.
Really?
I wear my DDC hat says just says Dead Dad Club. It's so graphic. It's hilarious to me. But when I wear that hat, and I try not to wear it all the time, but I sometimes just grab it when I leave the house. And, you know, I do a lot of work at coffee shops often. And then I've had so many people come up to me, like, first of all, they're like, "Oh my God, that hat's hilarious." Second, they go, it opens a dialogue. "Yeah, I lost my dad." When you start talking, and even if it's a 5-minute brief interaction, it's like you said, it's a connection.
It's a connection. And I feel less alone, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think other people do too. It's this incredible connection. And it's the Dead Parent Club is very real.
There's a lot of clubs out there.
There's a lot of clubs out there.
There's a lot of dead clubs out there.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't feel like I have, it's not that hard for me to like come up with positive outcomes.
I love that. Right? I couldn't agree more in my personal experience.
What are some of yours?
I mean, connection is a big one. And then even just not to make it all grandiose, but I'm like, I wouldn't have this podcast if my dad didn't die when I was 12. And this is important to me. This isn't just a business that I'm trying to grow. It's hopefully it supports me at some point, because this is what I want to do. But I would do this regardless. When people ask that question, what would you do if you had all the money in the world? I would genuinely still be doing this. And this wouldn't have existed if I didn't have my dad. My family we're always very close. But again, the love now is completely unbreakable, and our relationship has gotten so much closer. And there's a love that cannot be defined in any dictionary that I've found to express how we feel about each other, because of that experience, because of what we had to go through. And my outlook on life, which I can ramble on, and I've already rambled enough in this episode about how I perceive things. I see people differently. I see people so differently. I'm not saying I see them accurately, because I don't know their whole story, but I see their actions differently, in that I'm more forgiving and compassionate. Maybe if this never happened, I would look at people and get pissed off more based on their actions. And now I'm maybe, as passive as it sounds, I have still have my Jersey side. If you have to put my foot down, I'll put my foot down. But for the most part, I'm just like, oh no, we're just human. I don't know what that person's going through. It's really that reflection of, I don't know what that person's going through. Yeah, I was joking around. Every time I hold the door for someone, I see people walk by, they don't even give me a nod or an acknowledgement that I just held the door for you, and I held the old door when you were like 20 paces behind. I still waited for you, and they don't give me an acknowledgement. Maybe I could see BB getting upset at that. They're like, maybe that person just got horrible news 5 minutes ago, and whatever, I held the door open. Who gives a shit? They walk by me, and it's going to ruin my day. As little as a stupid example as that is, these small little perspective shifts just kind of like let me relax my shoulder in life, and that we're all just trying to figure it out. We all may know, but we know nothing, and we're all humans. We're all weird, emotional human creatures that a little bit more forgiveness, a little bit more compassion, and I just cruise through this life with a totally different beat to my drum. And I'm still learning, and there's still moments. I'm far from perfect, of course, but it's been a completely different perspective shift that evolved over time. It wasn't like, oh, towers went down, my dad's dead. I see this world now. It's a process. But because of that, everything's changed. And I said recently, I wonder if my dad didn't die, would he been able to have taught me everything that I know now? And I feel like his death taught me so much more than he could have ever taught me if he was still alive throughout this entire time. And I would grab my grief receipts and return all these lessons to have my dad back, of course. But then I wonder that existential question. I don't know if I would have learned all these things if it wasn't for his death.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's not that simple or something. Yeah.
It's not simple at all.
Yeah.
I don't even know what the fuck I just said.
No. I'm curious with your experience. I mean, yeah, the connection, understanding that people are going through all these different things. I mean, I think it was weird being on the inside of cancer because cancer is sensationalized, right? Cancer is like the boogeyman in the closet. That was like my perspective, right? Like you fight against cancer and you like win your battle against cancer, or you lose your battle with cancer. It's like it's personified, it's sensationalized. And it's weird being in it and just being like, oh, like this is what it is, right? It's like a lot of doctor's appointments, and it's a lot of pills, and it's a lot of IV drips, and it's a lot of uncertainty, and there's a lot of ups and downs. But it's like not obviously a person. It's not this thing. And I wonder about your experience. I mean, talk about, I don't know if sensationalize is the right word, but like with cancer, a lot of people know what it's like on the inside, right? Like a lot of people know what it's actually like. A lot of people don't.
Yeah, a lot of people don't. But yeah, I know
but with your experience, like some people do, right? But a lot of people don't know what that experience is like. Like what was that like, processing the grief and finding connection, feeling less alone, kind of that whole process?
It's weird in regards to the latter that you just said, because it's impossible to feel, not impossible. It on the surface seems hard to feel alone because it was so public. It's like arguably one of the most public events in history that my dad could have died in. And it was so public that it was always in my face, even to date. It's going to be the 24th anniversary this year, I believe. It's gonna be nationalized on TV. There's gonna be a few weeks of just social media, 9/11. I don't mind it, but it's hard to really feel alone, but it's also very easy to feel alone because it's so publicized and becomes this communal grief aspect, which is beautiful in so many ways. But then it does become isolating because it's covered in this glazed over, grandiose way. Not that I need my dad's face on the headline. Like I'd rather no headlines at all. But it's a contrast. It's a weird feeling of so much support, which is beautiful. And then also, oh, my dad was one of those. And then I saw that my dad is just a number. I don't take that personally. It's just me subjectively, rationally looking. I'm like, oh, my dad is just seemingly just a number of thousands of people. And then it's like, oh, it's not just my dad. There were thousands and thousands of daughters and sons and mothers and cousins and uncles and brothers and sisters. It was just... It's so wild when I put my dad in this bunch of other people, but then I need to individualize it and isolate myself from the masses just so I can heal from my own process. So there's a lot of contradicting things, but then again, that I feel like that happens with every grief experience. Like, I mean, even your dad didn't die in the same way I did, but also you kind of put it in a similar fashion that just like my dad died amongst so many other people, it's like, okay, but your dad died amongst so many other people that died of cancer. And it's just every experience is your own experience. So as much as you can say, no one's experienced mine, but no one's experienced yours either, because every dynamic is full of variables that no one other person can relate to. Not even you and your brother, I'm sure.
Yeah. No, it is. It is different, right? We all have our own experiences with it, even with the same person who has died. Are you you friends with other people who have lost their parents?
9/11 gang.
Yeah, 9/11 gang. Is that the term? Is that the club name?
It is now.
That's the group chat name.
No, I mean, I know some people. I know people. Yeah, people that I'm not honestly not. It's kind of odd actually that I don't like have like a 9/11 hangout every Tuesday at the local bar. But yeah, I know people, of course, but no one that I've actually got super close with, to be honest, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Like I know people that lost. Like I know a kid I randomly went to school with. His dad was a firefighter. Another girl from my hometown. She lost her dad. But no one that I ended up getting super close with for whatever reason. And I know I have plans. I want to have someone. I'm planning on having some people on that also lost their people on 9/11 because I think that'd be a cool dynamic because I want to hear from other people. And yeah, it is an interesting thought. You think that I would know more people that are closely, but no, I don't.
Yeah, interesting. Did you revisit the grief? Like, was there like what was kind of that process like for you? Because I asked this because a few people have reached out to me and have, especially people who lost parents younger, and have said, watching you go through this experience has caused me to like go back and revisit that experience with a different perspective. I'm curious what your experience was with that.
Yeah, it's changed. Again, I think it's different at any point. It's not even just age sometimes. For me in particular, I was 12, and so it's a pretty young age to even have any ability to, I could barely turn on my N64, let alone deal with my dad's death. So it's age is a big factor, but it's just kind of where you are in life. Like the way, from what I'm hearing from you and what I've seen, it's pretty remarkable the way I think you're processing it. And I don't know I can't feel what you're feeling, but you are doing it in a very, what seems like a healthy way. And only you can answer that. But I think it would revisit specifically for people that lost at a younger age. Or lost them younger because of just developmental aspects, not having experience in life or understanding themselves emotionally. And for me personally, yeah, when I hear someone like you, it does make me reflect on, because I was 35 years ago. So maybe I could even think about how was I feeling at 30, even though it's been 20 years. So it does bring it back specifically for someone in my situation where it happened younger, because there's all these years that go by that I personally don't remember, or maybe I think back and I was like, I don't feel like I was this. I don't think I was that. So it does kind of make me time travel, but not even just that. It just happened later in my life as I grew up, as I became a man and was really able to understand life a little bit more. And I still don't know if it's grief. Maybe it is just grief. Like, I don't know how to define if it's grief or me just navigating life. But I just made so many realizations and understandings about my dad's death, and really getting old enough to understand what my mom was going through. And then really when I understood what my mom was going through, it opened up new wounds. Like recently I was home and we were looking for my dad's signature because my sister wanted to get a tattoo of my dad's signature on her. And my mom saves a lot of things. And we were going through old documents, and then it reopened things for me because I was seeing documents. First of all, my dad's death certificate for the first time. I was holding it like, oh, this just died of. And then the crazy thing was, I think it said murder, or I think it was murder, like he was killed. There's like, it's weird looking on paper and saying, oh yeah, my dad was murdered. That was just like, I've seen that, I've thought about that before, but it's weird to see it on paper clarifying, documentationally that my dad was murdered. That opens some things. And I see old documents of what my mom had to go through that I had no idea as a kid. I was not thinking of all the logistics that my mom had to do about financial work, decisions to make, moving names around, like moving things around, all these logistics of death, the minutia of what grief really is, which is not just the emotional aspect. It's that life's got to go on, and the widow of the family has to look after kids, and they got to figure out how you're going to get to school. They got to make this financial decision. They got to figure out they got to get a second job. There's so many moving parts that goes way beyond the emotional aspect, which all is emotional, but it's just the day-to-day shit of life that just get completely covered up. And we just see it in the societal aspect that it's just, I'm sad, I'm missing this person. It's like, no, there's logistics of grief that make it so much harder. So in a long-winded answer to your question, it's nonstop. Not in a bad way. If anything, it's like fully gratitude now. And it's kind of amazing. I get amazed by how capable humans are. Like I have so much belief in just humans in general. I don't even care who's listening. Maybe you're an asshole, maybe you're a great person, but it's like I have so much belief in just human spirit and perseverance that I truly believe anyone can get through anything, and getting through things that I've seen people get through things that I haven't even getting close to touch. I've seen it. I see it all the time. I talk to people all the time. It's impossible for me not to believe in the human spirit. So that's why it's so powerful for me to have these conversations with people that are going through it and have gone through it, because I feel like I hope it just offers some sort of hope for someone who's listening that feels like their life is not worth living anymore, because it is.
Yeah, absolutely. I think going through that process with my dad, I felt going back to like the sensationalization of cancer, right? Like how do you get through it? How do you get through it? And I did feel going through it myself is that you just do, right? Like there's kind of like there's not much choice there or something, or it's not. I guess it's not really something I thought about much. That it just like
You mean 3 months in?
Yeah.
How do you feel 3 months in? How are you like today? Like, how are you today? This time 3 months in.
I've been. Let's see. The first month was very memorial focused, all the logistics stuff, right? So many logistics. After that, then it was Christmas. Right? It's back home. Nice to be around family. Tough that it was Christmas. That was the last time all four of us were together. It was Christmas last year. Came back to LA. This last month has been pretty nice. I haven't thought about him all that much because I don't really associate him that much with LA. So it's been a nice break. Tomorrow, I go back to Alaska to clear out his house. And we'll see how that goes. I'm not dreading it. I think it'll be good. I think, again, like I was saying about revisiting the grief, I think this last month has been a good pause on it. Let me just do my own thing, focus on my own life, spend time with friends. And then these next 6 weeks, kind of like dive into it again and revisit it. I think it'll be good. I think it will bring up a lot, but in a good way. I like want to do it. I think that is, for me at least, like an important part of grief. Like the like real world stuff, I think helps, like the emotional thing. Like putting on his memorials was helpful, even though it was a lot of work, because there's routine to it. There's like I don't know, just like it's helpful to have tangible things that can represent your grief or something, right? And to see that process move through, I think will help. I don't know. You can ask me in 6 weeks. So I'm kind of in a transition phase right now where last month I've been doing my own thing and haven't felt the grief all that much. Been a few milestones. I'm sure you feel that. There've been a few things where it's like, oh wow, like if he were alive, he'd be going home today, right? Like that was like a heavier day. But for the most part, I feel in an okay place and kind of ready to tackle this next kind of like big emotional barrier.
Yeah, it seems like you're not afraid to face it. Is that true?
Yeah, that's true.
And you allow yourself to feel it when you get nicked, as you say?
Sometimes. I don't, again, this is where like the performance, I don't know what's normal. I don't feel grief for very long. For me, like the sadness is fairly fleeting. And I don't know if that's me not like letting myself feel it or not, right? But I'll feel it for a couple minutes and then it kind of disappears. So like, I don't know how to answer that, I guess, because I don't feel like avoidant of it. Like I kind of like it when I miss him because I feel close to him.
Same, yeah. That's why it used to confuse me for a while if I wouldn't feel sad, it was hard to identify grief sometimes. But then I think about it, I'm like, maybe grief isn't. I don't think grief is just sadness. Like I think people think often grief, even from my own definition, was there was always grief is sad and sorrow and down. But grief isn't. It's not that. It's again. It goes back to that weird charcuterie board of eclectic flavors where it's every emotion. It's not just. Sometimes it's not even just an emotion. Sometimes grief is just a perspective shift. It's just the way we see things, like we already discussed. So grief is such a multi-layered word where it's like, okay, just because I'm sad doesn't mean if I'm not sad, I'm happy. I can still be happy and grieving. It could be part of the grief too. So I think there's no normal. It's just, I think You're clearly a smart man, and you're, as I already said, you seem to be diving into it and doing whatever you think is best. I have no formula for you. I have no answers or suggestions unless you ask, and it might be terrible suggestions that you should ignore. But nevertheless, it's just a new normal. You know what I mean? Like, I think everything is normal. Whatever you're feeling to me is quote unquote normal, even though it's abnormal. But it's normal because grief is such a natural process. So sometimes I feel like it's important not to get so hung up on what's normal and just go very Taoist and just let things happen. I think the more we knock down the walls of resistance and just allow things to flow naturally, whatever that means, even if naturally means up, down, left, right, backwards, forwards, just kind of got to let things just happen the way they're going to happen. And if we do it without resistance, I think we're going to end up downstream. And maybe that's a terrible analogy.
No, it makes sense. I mean, I think I've gotten into a better place of that, of just letting things happen. Sharing publicly has helped a ton, and hearing other people's experiences helps a lot, right? Where it's like, oh, I can feel whatever I want, right? That's okay. Like, people don't have these expectations of me. The other thing I think is interesting about grief with death is that we experience grief all the time in life. And we don't have expectations that's just sad unless it's death, right? Like a breakup, what sucks about a breakup is largely grief, but it's complicated, right? Like, you miss this person, maybe you're also like excited about doing something new, right? There's a mix. And it's the same, I feel like, for like my experience of going to college had some grief in it, right? Which is weird to think about. I was excited, I wanted to go, all this stuff. And at the same time, there was loss there, right? Like, this world that I knew, this world I'd spent 18 years with, my parents. I mean, like, there was loss. And I think we experience grief all the time. And even just like, if you, again, this sounds so trite to compare it to death because they're totally different. But even if you like lose something you really like, or that you have a favorite shirt and like whatever, it's like there's like some grief in that. And with death, there's like, we mostly associate grief with death. And there's a lot of expectation that grief is just sadness. But it helps me to think about grief in other aspects of life, because I think it's easier to see the different layers of it when it's not just death, when there's not necessarily that like expectation that it's like, oh, I have to like honor this person I love, or show respect to this person I love, or something like that.
I couldn't agree more. I've had multiple conversations where it wasn't biological loss, because I think there's just a natural impermanence of life, and impermanence equates to loss in some capacity, whether it's even just a house. You can move a house. People get sad when they leave their house because you had all these memories, and there's these memories within this tangible object. So grief is a part of life, and that's why I've learned, and people have asked me, David, has this helped you with your grief? I'm like, I guess, but it's helped me with my life, because there's so much that comes from grief. It's just, grief is so humbling. To me, I look at grief as humbling. It's like playing someone when you think you're a great athlete at one sport, and I get my ass whooped on a basketball court. Someone who's much better than me. It's like, oh, like that. There's a force like that out there. There's a whole different world, and like, it takes me down a notch, which is a necessary backstep in life. Sometimes it's a wake up call. And one of my really good girlfriend's father said something to me. He said, the storms of life come in many forms. The storms of life come in many forms. And that storm is, if it's represented in grief, it comes in so many different forms. And even within that form, there's so many different variables to how we respond to it. The sibling aspect, the timing of your life. Did you just move? Are you in a relationship? There's so many variables that can affect, and it's not just experiential or matureness. It's where we are in our life. Like, if my dad died when I was 35, it would be totally different. I'm not saying better or worse, but it'd be a totally different experience. He just happened to happen us on that day, as you said. And so grief is just life, in my opinion. Like you said, I couldn't have expressed it any better than what you just said, and couldn't agree more.
It really is. No, and I think that helps. Identifying grief in other aspects of life helps me make sense of my experience, because I think grief can be confusing when you think of it in terms of simple emotions, right? And again, moving is a good example. Which is like, why do I feel so sad about this? Like, I want to go to this new city. Like, why do I feel? And I think it's helpful for me to like understand that's like, oh, like that is like part of this experience of loss. There's a lot of layers to it and a lot of quote unquote simple emotions that make up this kind of more complicated emotion.
Yeah, I wonder how we can hone that down in regards to, I guess, a death, losing someone, just like it's moving from a house, because there is that sag. We're leaving a place, we're leaving the past. Like by moving out of a house, it's just a house filled with insulation, drywall, and materials. But there was this whole life with that house that we're leaving behind. And it's just these memories that existed, and we can no longer have that house moving forward. But how, like, what is the sadness there? Even if you're upgrading to a new house, not to compare it to grief, like the sadness is just about the past, is it not? You know what I mean? Like what is in the house that is holding the sadness?
I think it's the sadness about the past, right? About the good
Just letting
memories,
go.
about like how it felt or the routine or.
But what is it about, like the thought of, oh, I could have all these amazing memories in the new house, which is part of it, but it is a weird thought specifically to a house of moving away, and then, but we're just, I guess, outside the neighbors thing and the neighborhood and the routines, it's just, that's kind of what grief is in a way. It's going to a new house, a new neighborhood where it's a new normal, and but you can still make new memories in this new house. It might not be the same. You're not going to have the same things in that house. You're going to have to adjust to a different side of the bed, or steps, no steps, but there's still new memories to be had.
Yeah, new memories to be had. I mean, I felt, I mean, it sounds weird to say, I felt like a lot of excitement after my dad's death. Not immediately after, but once I got to the point where I was like, okay, like he's gone. I felt a lot of excitement because it felt like a new life to me, right? So much of the last year, and this was because of cancer and things like that, but so much of the last year was him, right? Like I felt like I gave up a good chunk of my life, not everything, but I gave up a good chunk of my life to be there with him. I still feel a lot of excitement going in, mixed in with the sadness and everything else, right? Like, okay, like it's over. There's clarity.
There's a little bit of relief there.
There's relief, absolutely. Yeah. And it means that, okay, I can start doing really the things that I want to do. There's not this cloud hanging over me. I mean, this isn't quite true, but I think the time like leading up to his death was almost harder than the time after his death, because the uncertainty I found to be the hardest part of that process. Like, my dad's options at one point were kind of like, is he going to die in a month, or is he going to live for like 5 more years? And those are like, that's a wide range. I struggle. I never got to a place where it's, how do I hold both of these? Like, how do I act knowing that my dad might die in a month, or he might be fine. He might go home and we might have Christmas together, and we might like whatever. He might like meet his grandkids. I mean, like this whole like life may happen, or he might die in a month. And that uncertainty is so hard.
That's a weight. You're carrying a weight.
And when he died, it's like, okay, that chapter's over. Like, I know how this story ends. I can like focus on something else, and like excitement, relief for sure. And excitement was one of those feelings that I noticed that sounds so weird. Like, why would you ever be excited that your dad died? And of course I wasn't excited that he died. I was excited that there was like clarity, right? I could move on. I could start processing what had happened. And people talked about like anticipatory grief. And that helped me in that process of understanding like that is part of what I was feeling. But yeah, it's just like there's so many different pieces to it.
Yeah, and that's even a different type of anticipatory grief, because you're anticipating grief, but also not even sure if you're going to end up grieving.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, some people are confirmed to be terminal. That's true anticipatory grief, but also you were kind of in limbo. You're in limbo there in those cases where you're not sure if someone's going to survive. But I've heard that over and over again in regards to there is a relief, and you know, it's nice to hear that you're not expressing guilt with that, because there's nothing to be guilty about, because the weight that you guys had to carry for the last X many years it's heavy. It's heavy. So I think it's a beautiful perspective for you to do that. And like we tapped into earlier, I'm sure with the love it seems like you and your father shared, it's how he'd want you to continue to, you know, thrust into life. So I'm sure he's very proud of you.
Yeah. I hope so. I think so.
Yeah, I always think that too. But at the end of the day, I mean, what the hell are we supposed to do? Let's just we gotta keep going. I guess we don't gotta. You can do what the hell you want, people. But there's just so much more. There's just so much more, and I appreciate you giving us the opportunity to hear your story only a few months in. And I would love to stay in touch in regards to your journey, because I'm curious to see how things go in the next X amount of months, because it seemed like you made some incredible ground since this time passed.
No, I appreciate it. And yeah, thanks for letting me talk about it. I really enjoy talking about it. I don't know if you feel like this, but people, I want to talk about it, right? People, especially people who haven't lost people in their lives, it can be hard to know. They're like not quite sure how to respond, right? Or like tiptoe around it. But I like talking about it. It helps me. So I appreciate it.
Quick outro before we do get out of here. What are words that, do you have an issue with any specific words that people say to you during that time when he did pass, or words that you prefer, or any kind of idea of those words of condolences that work for you?
The one thing I would say, and this has been learning, because I 100% have said this, would have said this, is sometimes people say like, I cannot imagine what you're going through. And for me, like, I know it comes from a good place, and I don't judge people for saying it. But for me, that makes me feel more alone. And I think going back to like grief happens in all sorts of ways. I think having lost my dad, it's not actually all that different than if I had imagined it 6 months ago, right? Yes, it's like a level of like pain and loss that's stronger than anything else, but it's on the same spectrum, right? It's not this brand new human experience that like never experienced before. And I think that it for me, if someone hasn't lost someone, I think it's meaningful to say, hey, like, I haven't lost my dad, but I know what loss feels like in different ways. And I know it's tough, right? Like, to me, that feels like very, like, that hits deep, right? Because I want to feel less alone, right? Like, that's...
What about the opposite of that? Like, where people say, if you could say, I imagine that's I imagine that's hard, or very difficult. Like, I actually imagine that's very hard.
And that resonates with me,
yeah.
Right? I think because, again, like, my experience with grief is like, I just want to feel less alone. Like, that is the core thing. Nothing, it doesn't go away or whatever. I just want to feel like I'm not alone in this.
I think that's a good thing, yeah.
When I feel like that, it's really meaningful. And that I can't imagine is, to me, a little isolating.
Yeah, I've heard that before. That makes sense. And again, I'm on the same boat. I don't really, when people say something, I'm not, unless they say screw your dad, it's like, okay, well, fuck you. But outside of that, it's like people don't know what to say. It's hard to say, even though I'm not perfect at expressing the words. I'm more physical, but I think that can be isolating. I think in a time like this, that's the exact opposite of what anyone wants. And with a community like you're building, of you sharing your story on socials, it's amazing when you do see that the connection and see how many other people are going through this in their own ways.
Absolutely.
And you are not as alone as you think in regards to the experience of whatever you're going through. It might be individual and isolating because it's your internal feelings, but there's a whole big world out there of people going through a lot of similar things where we can find the camaraderie. But Grant, as usual, I'll put their links in the show notes for anyone's listening. But if there's anything else you want to drop for yourself or anything you didn't get off your chest, mic's yours before we get out of here.
Nope, that's it. Yeah, I share on Instagram, TikTok. I write a little bit on Substack. That's it.
Beautiful. Links will be in the bio. Thank you, Spotify, for hosting us. Apple, don't get mad at me until you give me a studio. But other than that, another episode of Dead Talks. Grant, thank you so much. Until next time, guys. Ciao.
Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Dead Talks. Please do not forget to hit the subscribe button and also the notification bell. That'll give you updates as to when we post a new video, more episodes, and more content in general. We are streaming on all the major podcast platforms, including Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pandora, and all that. And also find us on Instagram at Dead Talks Podcast or www.deadtalks.net. Thank you so much.